This is Len Edgerly with an episode of the Kindle Chronicles recorded on a flight from Nashville to Boston. This is going to be an experiment. I know there's going to be a lot of background noise, so I won't have that much of the voiceover. I've been at Digital Book World with David Peach this week, and I've got a lot of audio on my computer that I'm going to stitch together to give you sounds of some of the people we heard and also a couple of conversations that David and I had during the show. I hope this will give you a flavor for the breadth of the material and a lot of pretty interesting ideas, I thought. It'll be as if perhaps you were with us at the show at the Music City Center in Nashville. I appreciate those of you that reached out with concern for my mother. She's still having a pretty tough time after the broken hip. I've been out of touch these past 4 days, and I'm looking forward to getting back out there to see how things are going with her and my dad. And I will be babysitting with Darlene with our 4-year-old and 2-year-old grandsons who live next door to us in Cambridge. All that means not the usual time that I devote to putting an episode together, and that's why I'm talking to you from the 9th row, an aisle seat on the Southwest flight to Boston.
Hey, I'm Paul Cutzinger, and I work for Amazon, and I have a team that helps teach people how to build Alexa skills.
You mentioned in the workshop the difference between writing for the ear and writing for the eye. What can you say about that in general? Maybe just give one or two examples. A pretty kind of a radical way to think that there's actually different ways of writing for those two.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways you can think about this is if you were to read a section out of a novel, like a Harry Potter novel or something like that, and then you watch the same scene in a movie, you'll hear different dialogue and everything. They'll write it differently. Here's a couple examples that everybody I think will probably get pretty quickly. Like when you're writing a paper, you probably have paragraphs, and the paragraphs have like a topic sentence and then some supporting points and a concluding sentence. And those are really good for reading because you basically learn to read the first sentence and kind of ignore the rest of the paragraph. And then unless you don't quite get it, then you take some more time and dwell on that paragraph. With voice, there's no dwelling or going back and looking at the previous stuff. So really what you want to do is you want to set the context first and then make your point versus have a topic and then support your topic.
It's almost just the reverse.
It's just the reverse, right. And that's kind of how we talk too. Like we'll start. I might say something to pique your interest just a little bit in the beginning, but I'll lay it out and then say here's the point. There's some other differences too, which is just how do you comprehend what you're saying. And so one technique that people use when they're writing is they make lists. And so in a list, there's a thing called an Oxford comma separated list.
Right. And
so this is where you might say thing 1, comma, thing 2, comma, thing 3, and thing 4. And you put the comma before the and, so you know that those two things are in a group, whatever. In voice, you can do that, but lists get pretty tedious to hear all the options. You don't really know when they're going to end and what's happening. And so there's another technique called clustering that helps you with that. So an example of that is, I heard on the radio actually, NPR, somebody was saying, these owls live all over the world. They're in North America and South America, as well as Europe and Asia. And so you're like, they did it clustering. They did this and this, as well as this and that. And so you do that with phone numbers too. Like you might say 247-47, right? And you keep going. So yeah, that's another technique that's a little bit different for voice. Punctuation is really important with voice. You want to put periods where you need them and commas for pausing, exclamation marks to indicate things. And you don't need that as much in writing. It's nice, but you can actually get by with a little bit more.
So people who are working on Alexa skills, and even in the simple exercise like you walked us through using an Alexa blueprint to make something you can do in Alexa, you almost have to learn a new way of writing when you're starting to do your first experimentation with this platform.
Yeah, you do. I've written a lot of things. I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm designing out my skill. And then I listen to it. I'm like, oh, I got to change it. Right? So I think it's very important to write out what you want. Make sure you're getting the value you want for your customer very quickly. But then drop it into like a blueprint or drop it into in the testing tools. We have a voice tool that you can listen to the sounds. Just go and listen to it and hear it and see if it works right. Or talk to a friend. Like there's a technique called Wizard of Oz where you pretend like you're Alexa, and you have somebody else to pretend like they're human, and then you have the conversation back and forth, and you can hear it really quickly. If you try it that way.
Now, the Blueprint tool, it came out in April, and I tried it, and I see there's a lot more of them now up there, and you walked us through the workshop. What level of, I can't picture my 89-year-old mother doing a Blueprint on Alexa, but what's your sense of who you're gearing that kind of introductory way of experimenting with Alexa and customizing it? How much does someone have to know to really be able to do it?
Yeah, well, you don't need to know any programming language or anything like that. You don't even really need to know the logic around a programming language to make it work, because what you're doing is you're going into the Blueprint and you're filling out a form. So I actually think your 89-year-old grandma could do, like, for example, a question-answer Blueprint, where she would say, I have a question which is, hey, what's my favorite snickerdoodle recipe? And then she could provide the answer to it. Now, anytime somebody says, hey, what's my favorite snickerdoodle recipe, to Alexa, it would say back her one, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a question and an answer. Like, you got to be able to type, you know, and you got to do that kind of stuff. And so there is a conceptual leap you have to make, which is it's on Alexa, and you kind of understand how people talk to Alexa back and forth. But once I think you grok that piece of it, you understand that piece of it, it's pretty straightforward. I've seen very young children make stuff for their Mother's Day. I don't know. There's no real technical barrier. It's just a question of desire, I think.
And maybe there would be a guide. A grandchild might help a grandmother get set up at her computer.
That'd be great.
And then, do something really pretty amazing.
To me, that's part of why voice is so cool and what it's all about, is because it really is a communal kind of an experience where I'm not stuck with my face in my phone. I'm doing something with it. Even if I'm doing a recipe, we're all doing the recipe together. If I get a fact, we're all getting the fact together. And so I love that you brought up two people could work together to make a skill. It just piles on to that experience.
Last question. I know you've got a Twitch presence. What are some of the other ways that if people got excited about this, they could learn at their own speed and go as far into it as they want to?
Yeah. So I think it starts with our website, which would be developer.amazon.com. And then from there you can find out all the stuff about Alexa, and there's tutorials and videos and everything. And dev docs. You can go as deep as you need to there. That's everything. Our Twitch channel, so that's a place where people live stream stuff. So we're there, we go on air, we're hanging out with everybody, we just chat with them. So that's twitch.tv/Amazon Alexa. And then you can find us on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn. We're just kind of all hanging out in those places, getting to know everybody. What's the Alexa skill that gets used most in your home? There's a few. Of course we set timers and music and stuff like that, but let me talk about a skill that I really like. You just basically say, has the dog been fed? And then it'll say, no, the dog hasn't been fed yet. Would you like to feed it now? And you feed the dog. And then later on, when my son comes by or my wife comes by, hey, has the dog been fed? Yeah, the dog was fed 20 minutes ago or an hour ago. It's really cool. No way. So whoever fed the dog is sort of telling Alexa who can tell the next person. Exactly. You just said, I fed the dog just now, which sets a timestamp, and then the next person can come by. And if it's, do you remember what that one's called? Yeah, it's has my dog been fed? Huh. Yeah. And so you just find, has my dog been fed, enable it, and you too can avoid feeding your dog twice. My dog doesn't like this skill, but I like this skill. Yeah.
I'm Walt Mossberg, and I am a former technology columnist, conference producer, podcaster, etc. Do you have a kind of a basic observation about how well Amazon has played its surprisingly strong hand at the introduction of Alexa as a platform? You have to make a distinction between the Alexa platform and the Echo devices. And I do think there's now, particularly with the recent announcement, there's so many Echo devices that I think there's a real risk of consumer confusion. Obviously, I'm not critical of the stronger play just to say Alexa is a platform, we're going to put it in whoever's devices would like to license it. That makes sense to me. But I don't know that an average person walking down the street here in Nashville or anywhere else would be able to distinguish between one Echo and another.
Walt Mossberg was the keynote speaker who began Digital Book World on Tuesday. He set a fascinating framework by talking about ambient computing, how computing will be all around us. He pointed to the walls of the room and said, you'll be in a room like this, and it'll all be sensors and listening and ability to provide information just the way your laptop computer does now. A far-reaching vision by a guy who's retired as a technology columnist and still really at the top of his game as he set the stage for this entire conference about digital publishing. Later that morning, David and I sat down in a relatively quiet part of a hallway to talk about what we had heard so far. When you think of Paul Cutzinger, who was the Alexa platform guy yesterday that did the workshop, what was your big takeaway from that session?
One is that he made it very accessible, showing us tools that said, this is how you can get started. I'd tried to do an Alexa app before and just got overwhelmed, but he made it accessible. A couple things that he specifically talked about in this voice-first idea is that to navigate menus on a website with a mouse, you have to go through all of these different levels, but with voice first, you can get there by just talking about it. And then he talked about these types of services, voice first, Alexa particularly, as being a social event, as opposed to just something I do on my phone by myself. I'm sharing it with a room. So I appreciated that perspective when I'm thinking about creating skills.
One thing I noticed in comparison with Cortana, which I used because now Cortana lives on Echo devices, Cortana, every time it answered a question, this is the Microsoft AI voice agent, it would say the exact same thing. Is there anything else I can help you with? And after about 3 times, it got so irritating. And I noticed that Paul was saying, you can't just repeat things when you've got a voice interface. You have to vary it. And what he was talking about, the difference between writing for the ear and writing for the eye, I sometimes wonder, what are these thousands of people that Amazon is hiring for the Alexa team? What are they doing? And I thought I glimpsed that they're just moving this whole interface down to increasing levels of effectiveness, natural use, and I wonder if that's a competitive advantage, that if people try 2 platforms and they go with the one that just seems more natural. But I thought I just saw a glimpse of how hard it is to get a new platform like this better than all of the rest, and maybe that's what Amazon is actually accomplishing in the early days.
One funny story about that idea of Amazon kind of predicting what it is you're going to ask or say is, well, one time my wife told Alexa to do something, and I told Alexa she didn't have to listen to my wife. We were just goofing around, and because my wife had contradicted something I just told Alexa to do. And Alexa responded with, well, I've been programmed to listen to everybody and be kind, and that whole idea of just being a real person, which, of course, I know Alexa's not a real person, but sometimes she responds like one, and that's so much better than hearing the same response droning over and over.
Yeah, I think so. What about Walt Mossberg?
I read just this morning his last article that he wrote, which he referenced in this session, and so this session was pretty much just that article expanded. And he talked about the lull of where we're at right now. We've had all this massive improvement and technology advancement in the last 40 years. But we're kind of at a downtime right now. And of course, the Alexa people are saying, "Oh no, we're not. We're really charging forward with this." But I look at the smartphone. I go to Africa. Everybody's got a smartphone, and that 10 years ago, not everybody had a notebook computer, and most people still don't have a notebook computer, but they have a smartphone. That has changed the world. Alexa isn't touching the world like that. But, as Walt said, we're in this lull that we're getting ready to see what's coming out of the labs. And in the labs, I think it is pretty exciting what's going on. I think some of the stuff he talked about was a little fanciful as far as this ambient computing. I think we will get there. I don't think it's going to really look much different 10 years from now.
One thing I was thinking about when I listened to Walt may be
in his 70s, I would guess. He's 71. So when he talks about something that's going to be happening and fully adopted in 20 years, he's going to be 91, which my dad's 91. I hope Walt lives that long, and that I bet he'll be following things. But it gets to be intriguing to me. I'm 68. You see these things coming, and you kind of get a sense of the pace of it. And it's like I don't want to ever die because I'll miss so much after that happens. And it's intriguing to think of an older person trying to stay up with these things, and what's the impact on their life. If at some point you just think, A, I'm not going to be here, B, I'm not processing this information as well as I used to, it's time to just go back and read books on paper or something.
You're at an age where you do remember before this 41-year change that he was talking about today. I'm only 48. So I don't remember the world, really, before all the technology change. And so I'm thinking, okay, yeah, it's going to keep changing in the same way it has always changed. But it hasn't always changed that way. But for my lifetime, it has. And so it will be interesting to see how long this lull, as he called it, lasts, and whether it really is a lull, or if it's just a couple years of, okay, things are quiet, but something's around the corner that's going to really break out and be a phenomenal.
I was surprised at the emphasis that he put on the necessity for laws to create guardrails for this next great revolution. It's hard to be optimistic that that could really happen when the political system in this country is so kind of broken and in gridlock. And then I kind of wondered, if there aren't guardrails, these things won't just stop and wait for the guardrails to be built. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just the nature of it. But what was your reaction to the emphasis that he put on that, and the need for laws that we just don't really see having happened yet in this country?
I think there's been a lot of technological changes over the last 100 years that we didn't have laws for, we didn't foresee, and we've made it okay. So I think things will get there. Now, does that mean we've not had any problems in the legal system? No, we got problems. We got things we have to deal with. But I don't know that I'm necessarily negative on the fact that we don't have the laws yet. I am a little concerned, well, more than a little concerned about the whole privacy thing. You know, when we do have ambient computing, we do need a better protection for the individual. But when we get to the point that he's talking about, where there's sensors in the walls that'll know what it is you want to see on TV and just show it right there on the wall, when we get to that point, I think we'll have the laws in place.
I agree. Well, lots more to come. It's great being here with you, David. Thank you you've been helpful in so many ways already, and I think we'll have fun bouncing ideas off each other as it continues.
Tuesday night there was an awards banquet at the conference, and Bradley Metrock, the director, had kindly inducted me into the Hall of Fame, the Digital Bookword Hall of Fame, along with Marie Dutton Brown, who's had a really remarkable career in the book business in various aspects of it, part of it at Doubleday in Harlem.
Marie, in so many ways, has triumphed with her career, and we're so privileged to have you here. Come on up. Come on up.
There was a lot of background noise, and Marie spoke quite softly, so my recording of her comments didn't come through too well. One thing she mentioned, she works now as an agent, and she's working on a book by a 10-year-old writer named Orion Razat called Geeky Stem Cell Jokes. It's going to be coming out in a year, so I made a reference to that as I started my own acceptance remarks. After Bradley's kind introduction.
Lynn Edgerly has been recording a podcast, a long podcast, every week for over 10 years. And it's called Kindle Chronicles. And it has given Lynn a lot of interesting insight on podcasting before anybody thought podcasting was cool. And publishing. Lynn is literally the personification of podcasting and publishing, something that everybody in this room now cares about. Lynn was all over that a long time ago. And the result of that is that Lynn has been able to document Amazon, arguably the most important company in publishing. We could get into that argument, it'd be a long one. Some might argue that, maybe. He's documented them over a long period of time. And he's been a model of consistency. He's shown incredible journalistic ethic. For digital book world, he's the perfect person to celebrate. And that's what we're going to do. Lynn, come on up.
Well, thank you, Bradley. And I'm honored to be inducted into the Digital Book World Hall of Fame with Marie Dutton Brown. And I want to say I think I look forward to inviting Brian onto a future episode of my podcast. He'll be an author to hear from in the future. It was great to hear. I covered Digital Book World several years when it was held in New York, and I love what Bradley and his team have done to reinvent DBW here in Nashville. The passion Bradley shows for life and his work has reminded me that you can accomplish surprising things when you begin something prompted by your heart. In my case, I've always loved reading, and I've always loved tech gadgets. I had been experimenting with podcasts for 2 years when Kindle was introduced in 2007, a gadget for reading books. How great was that? I thought I could probably talk about that forever. So why not start a podcast called the Kindle Chronicles? By the next summer, it was a Friday in July in Maine, I was ready to launch the podcast, and I haven't missed a show since. In related news, I am still married. I owe my wife, Darlene, a huge thanks for her patience with my weekly podcast habit. This has not always been convenient, especially on vacation trips abroad when I've spent half a week trying to get online to upload and create the show. I'm fortunate that I have not needed to earn any income from my Kindle Chronicles. What I have received as a result of my devotion to the show is way better than monetization. I have friends who are listeners around the world. I have had 530 conversations with fascinating people who love books and or technology as much as I do. I have been inspired by missionaries in every sector of the industry, beginning with authors, on through publishers, agents, booksellers, including a man who has been on the show twice, who started a company in Seattle 24 years ago to sell books online. So, Bradley, I love how your passion has given new life to this annual gathering of book lovers and technologists. I will bring this handsome award home with me to Massachusetts Thursday with gratitude and renewed commitment to the conversation. Thank you.
It was great having a partner to cover the conference, and on the second full day yesterday, David Peach did one of his own interviews with a speaker who I wasn't able to hear because I had been at a different session.
My name is Melissa Hammersley. I'm a co-founder and the chief design officer of Novel Effect, and what we do is we create voice-driven soundscapes for children's books. So we add theme music, sound effects, characters' voices as you read aloud from the print book with your child.
You mentioned in your talk that you have, if I have the physical book that I've bought, then I can read it along with your novel effects. How many books do you have in your catalog?
Yeah, so right now in our free iOS app, we have over 200 books. What we've tried to do when we're curating that collection is pick books that we know parents and teachers have on their shelves and read with children, but we're also working with publishers and independent authors to bring their content to the app in the way that they want.
You're on iOS now. When you roll out to Android, to the smart speakers, will all of those titles be there, or do you have to then work those out also?
No, so the way our system is built, once we have the back end of the technology running, we'll be able to deploy all of the books and soundscapes we've created to each system as it's unleashed.
So the system then is just an interface to what you already have.
That's right. Correct.
We can add our own stories, put in the sound and stuff. Can we do that with a book I already have, or is that a story that I've written for my children?
So when we have the studio available, the creation studio available to the public, you would be able to write your own story and then add the music and sound effects to the story that you've created for your children or for your class or what have you. We are working through the process of understanding how we will be able to allow users to create soundscapes for books that are written and distributed by publishers, because we wouldn't want to get into any sort of infringement on their publishing rights, and we wouldn't want them to be concerned about the content that's being created. So we're still working that part out. But right now, or when it's available, you would absolutely be able to do it for a story that you yourself have written.
I'm back home in Cambridge, so the audio is going to be a little better now that I'm back with my Blue Yeti microphone. The other interesting part of Digital Book World for me yesterday was that I moderated a panel about podcasting and publishing. This is something that Bradley Matrock had asked me to do, and it was an excellent panel. It had a woman from the Macmillan podcast operation, Kathy Doyle, Rob Walsh, who's been working at Libsyn ever since I've been doing my podcast, and is a real nationally known figure in the podcasting movement, and then a fellow named Asif, who has a company that is able to take audio and do transcripts for it for free. I tried it on my podcast, and then that helps search because there are metadata and search terms that are put in. It's called Audioburst, and a very powerful tool. So the four of us were in a room with probably about 100 people there by the time there were people sitting on the floor, standing room only, and a lot of people very interested in how podcasting might help them to promote authors and to do other work. I'd say most of the people in the room were representing publishers. I'll play you some excerpts from that panel, which was held yesterday.
Rob, you probably have had a lot of people come up to you and say, I want to do a podcast. I'm thinking of doing a podcast. And they might have expectations about how much work it's going to take to do it. And do they generally underestimate the amount of work it's going to require to do a successful podcast? Or what do you tell people to get their expectations tuned to reality from the start?
Well, I say 5-1-5. If you were wanted to blog something, it might take you 5 minutes to blog that. It may take you an hour to put it out as an audio podcast. It may take you 5 hours to get that all done together as video. So it is a lot more work to do audio. That's why there's a lot less audio podcasts. We have to put it in perspective. There's 600 million blogs out there. There's only about 500,000 podcasts, of which less than 200,000 have released a new episode in the last year. So the competition is a lot less on the audio podcasting side. So yes, it does take more work. That's why there's a lot less podcasters out there. But the hard part, really, at the end of the day, is the creation of the content. Coming up with good content. Recording has gotten pretty easy, and the editing isn't too bad either. And you should edit, by the way. That's what takes a little bit longer. One of the big differences between successful podcasts and not successful is editing. I literally one time heard a podcast and the person said, the person goes, hold on, I gotta go seize out the door, and walked away for 5 minutes. And then came back and said, okay, I'm back. That's an edit point. Right there.
When I look forward as a podcast creator, I think that the bar is raising in terms of the quality of the listening experience. And one show that I look to for clues as to what's coming is Radiolab. And they are doing very creative things. It's not just people talking in kind of an NPR way. They'll be talking and then they'll cut in kind of in real time from the studio, and then they'll go back to the interview, and there's a lot of jumping around, which is perfectly possible to do with a podcast. But in the early podcasting period, it was just, someone's at a mic and they're talking and they're just talking and talking, and if you like what they're talking about, great. But I have the aspiration, as somebody who hopes to be doing this in 5 or 10 years, to try some new things. Sometimes I'll have an interview and there'll be something that's not quite clear, and I'll cut in and say, well, actually, when he was answering that question, I was hoping that he would say something else. There's sort of a meta layer. And I think it adds to the energy of the listening experience when there are some surprising breaks in it. I've got some music, some bumper music, things like that. An individual podcaster like myself and perhaps a publisher that's getting into it, you're not going to be Radiolab, you're not going to be Serial that have huge staffs, and you don't have to be. But I think if you're going to be a sort of an animated and lively player in the space, you have to take advantages of the creative possibilities that it represents and take a few chances, you know. I mean, one show can not quite meet the bar, and if you're doing it regularly, there's going to be a lot of shows after that, so people will forget the experiments didn't quite turn out.
We'll shift now to an interview that David and I did, I believe it was yesterday, and it was two brothers, David and Jeff Cook, entrepreneurs who've had some incredible success with businesses that they've started, apps, and then sold for $100 million, one called My Yearbook. The one that interested me the most was called Readercoin, and it began with a children's book which Jeff wrote, and here he explains how it happened.
It started off as a bedtime story I would tell my daughter, and she, on these 20-minute drives to school every morning, we used to live relatively far away from the school. She would ask for another story, and this was when she was maybe in second grade. So I would have to tell a story about this girl, Veronica, who lived on the side of a volcano, and Veronica is more or less my daughter, Madeline. And I'd fill this story with some characters, and then I had to kind of keep those characters straight and come up with things for them to do. So I started researching volcanoes, started reading, I'm fairly widely read on volcanoes at this point. And then I started writing down some of the stories I thought were better, and that basically began the process. When I originally started writing, I thought it was going to be a short poem, and then it was 320 pages later.
So, you tried to find some readers for it. You did a number of things. We'll fast forward to Readercoin, and how did you come up with that idea, David?
Well, so when Jeff first launched his book too, we were having a hard time with discovery and just finding people to read his book. We tried going the giveaways route, and he ended up spending over $5,000 just trying to get people to read his book. And
this was on Goodreads mainly?
And on Goodreads. And in the end, we also didn't feel like the people we were giving away the books to were actually reading the book all the ways, and we were just kind of having really disappointing a time trying to give away the books in that sense. So we have experience making apps, and we thought maybe we could do something better. And the idea to pay people to read kind of was in our minds, and that would be a natural incentive. We saw things like Sweatcoin going around, which pays people to run, and Charity Mile, which when you run, you kind of earn points that you could like donate to a charity and stuff like that. And we were inspired by ideas like that were seeming to be successful, and like natural incentives to kind of get people to do stuff like that. And so we built Readercoin kind of around that idea of like incentivizing readers to read. And after growing it for a while, we got Jeff's book on it. We added tons of classics, so you could read anything like Pride and Prejudice or something like that too on there right now. And right now we're also just trying to get a lot more authors to join.
Now, you were showing me earlier, Jeff, there's some fascinating information for you as an author. What can you tell about who's reading Veronica and the Volcano today?
Yeah, so you can tell actually quite a bit. So, and I think Catnip for Authors is actually apt. There's an author tab, and if you tap into it, you can see the listening and reading time, both today and all time. So, for example, if I tap into it right now, I see that there were 52 hours of listening time on Veronica and the Volcano today, an hour of reading time across 34 listeners and 6 readers, 40 total uniques, 44 Discover taps, 26 times it's added to the library. All in, you're looking at almost 4,000 hours of total listening and reading time. And this divide on listening and reading is actually true of the entire network. So it's almost 10 to 1. people prefer the listening to the reading, even though every book on the platform can be listened to or read through the platform.
If an author is using the platform, they can tell they're paying in Readercoin for these numbers for the time. Can you give an idea, a rough ballpark of what kind of a cost does this sort of readership entail for the author?
Yeah, actually, the author's getting paid to promote the book. So the Readercoin model is it's basically promotion that pays. So the author is earning Readercoin for every 10 minutes anyone spends listening or reading their work. And so is the reader. Now, the author has the option to take their Readercoin and basically give it back to the reader by saying, I want my book to be a bonus book. And bonus books appear in more prominence throughout the application. Veronica and the Volcano is a bonus book. Basically what it means is our default algorithm is ranked on top earning books. Obviously, the more Readercoin a book earns, the more likely it's going to rank relatively highly in our algorithms. And you could also just filter the search results by bonus books, and so that will naturally gravitate readers. Right now, readers read maybe 2 to 1 to the non-bonus books, but there's 1,600 plus non-bonus books, and a handful of bonus books, maybe a few dozen.
Who's buying the Readercoin then?
So the Readercoin is aimed at driving users into the app. So I mean, my experience is building significant apps with 4+ million daily active users. And in the case of my yearbook, which my brother and I started together back in 2005, we didn't monetize that platform for a number of years.
Okay, so
then we sold it for $100 million.
Right. So you're in the period now where you're putting money into this business.
But it's very thoughtful. So I mean, what we essentially do is pay out about a penny to 2 pennies per hour anyone spends listening or reading. Based on other apps that I've created, I know that you tend to be able to monetize an app anywhere between 10 cents to 60 cents an hour of time the person spends listening or spends using the app. And 10 cents would be actually pretty low. So I mean, I think our sense is, yes, it's certainly, we're not emphasizing the monetization aspect, because really the whole ball game is, can you get the reader?
Yeah. What scale are you at now in terms of number of readers, number of authors?
Yeah, just launched this summer, relatively low scale. We're at about 1,500 to 2,000 daily active users right now. Actually, our stats are public. You can look at them. I think from our Facebook page, you could probably find them. But what we are seeing is, I think well in excess of 100,000 minutes per day of listening and reading time. It works out to be something on the order of about 150 minutes spent per day per person on the platform. So that's been the most surprising stat we've seen to date. Yeah, over 2 hours of time. So I think when we originally set the economy, we were like, 30 minutes would seem reasonable, and maybe even on the high end. But no, it's 2 hours a day that a person spends. The average person spends reading or listening.
Now, Readercoin, given all the talk about blockchain and tokens, this is not that, right?
That's right. So I mean, it's more like, Dave mentioned Sweatcoin. It's similar to that. It's an engagement currency that you earn through engagement that you can then exchange for rewards. There could eventually be a blockchain play down the road if you had substantial scale, but we're not about to do an ICO related to this.
Yeah,
I wish that I'd had more time to learn about Readercoin. It seemed like a very creative idea, and these brothers obviously knew what they were doing because they'd had some other success with apps. And the idea of getting paid for reading a book, part of me thinks, that's wrong. I'm a bit of a reading snob, and I think I remember kids in school that their parents would pay them to read books. And I thought, well, geez, nobody's going to have to pay me to read a book because I love reading. So I would have that hurdle to it. But I see what they're doing. It's a way for an author to get targeted information about who's reading the books. And the payment is small enough to be more like a game than anything that you're really going to get significant monetary benefits for. But Digital Book World, creative ideas, young brothers doing things. I love it. I'll mention that there was some blockchain activity at this conference. You might be relieved to know that I didn't have time to sit in on a session by Publica and another company. There was one session that I was at with David, and the guy started programming on the Ethereum platform, and I don't know how to program, and it was just really getting over my head. I don't know what I was doing to spend the time. And David piped up at one point and said, I think you left a semicolon out of line 25 on the program that he was working. But the point was that blockchain is something that publishers are doing real experiments with, and there was some information about it at Digital Book World, which I won't be able to explain to you much what it meant, but it was happening and it was real, and there were some people there that were following it a lot more closely than I was, in spite of my MIT blockchain course, which has got 2 weeks ago, and I have been enjoying learning about the topic in general. I'll finish up with part of David and my last conversation that we had today before we left, and it'll give you a feeling for some of the other sessions that we attended. And it was fun to sit down and have these conversations. I wasn't exactly thinking of those Sesame Street characters up in the theater talking and kibitzing about everything, but we had some common interests, and he was very good company at the conference, and really appreciate the time that he spent helping me out.
One thing that I wanted to have a chance to hear about libraries, and you went to that session, had the founder of OverDrive. What were some of the highlights of that session?
Well, it was called The Evolving Job of Modern Librarians, and they talked about book lending and who the patrons are and everything. There wasn't so much about what OverDrive does. The assumption was that everybody knew who OverDrive was. It was more, and I really enjoyed this, how the libraries can engage with the patron. One of the comments was the library is the place where the librarian does their work, but a librarian is so much more than just a book person. It's a broker of information. One of the guys asked the question, how many of you out in the audience has a personal librarian? 2 of us raised our hand. I was one of them, and somebody else raised their hand. And he said, well, I would like to be your personal librarian. If you have a question, if you need information, give me a call. Come get my card. That's what we do. We like to help people find information. I thought that was great.
Now, this was somebody who was a librarian, and he was sort of showing the example of how librarians should connect with people more than they do?
Well, his point was that you can use your library. That's what we as librarians are, and he is the librarian for or one of the librarians here at the Nashville Public Library. And he was here saying, you need to engage with someone that can help you find information. And don't be intimidated by that. Sometimes people go into libraries, they're afraid to ask a question because sometimes librarians make people feel like, you're so stupid for asking this question. I've been to libraries like that. But I go to a library where I feel like I have a personal librarian, and I appreciate that. So that was one of the things that was commented about this morning. And then the library, this is a quote by one of the ladies that actually works at a digital-only library. She said, the library is not the destination anymore. The customer is the destination, the patron. And what she meant by that is we need to take the information to where they're at. Maybe they don't get into the library because they don't know about it. In her case, it's a digital library. And she said, we go to the DMV. We go to the food bank. The people we serve are the people who may not even have their own car. We go ride public buses, and we take devices and get them to sign up and say, here, you can check out this device. She didn't say a Kindle, she didn't say a Kobo, but it was some kind of device like that. Or, sign up and now go to our website and download all these resources if you need them.
That's it for this special episode about Digital Book World. I want to thank David Peach for helping me out. I want to thank Bradley Metrock and his excellent staff there at Score Publishing, Peggy, Dean, Ray, the rest of the team. It was quite a massive undertaking to move this conference from New York City to Nashville, and this was the first holding of the conference in Nashville since Score Publishing bought it. I think they did a fantastic job, and I was really glad to be a part of it. Next week, I'm going to be sitting down to talk with Dave Slusher, who has the long-running Evil Genius podcast. Very creative guy, and he has a do-it-yourself way of scanning books that he's going to talk about. And then we'll just find out. He's always interesting to talk to about books. That'll be next week. Thanks for listening.